We're going to start part one of the RR-1 bobber assembly video. You're going to want to watch the teardown videos and the fork lowering video and also the CS1 build video for the handlebar mounting as well as the bobber video in order to complete this. If you haven't already purchased one, a good guide is the Climber Repair Manual we got on the cover. This will help you with torque specs, wiring diagrams, and so forth. It's a really good resource. Alright, the first step of the bobber build is to cut the frame rails. You actually want to cut the shock towers off the bike. You're going to do this with a 4.5-inch die grinder. Here the next shot is going to be the frame, a stock frame. Now you can do this with the engine in the bike. You take a straight edge and run it down the backbone and mark on the shock towers with a Sharpie where you're going to cut. Now when you cut this with your 4.5-inch die grinder, you want to be very careful not to cut the down tubes. So cut above the line. Make sure you cut it above and you can grind it down with a flapper wheel or a grinding disc as shown above in the picture. So here's a shot of the 4.5-inch 4.5-inch die grinder with cutoff wheel, and that's where you want to cut. Make sure you stay above the line, and you can always grind it down afterwards. And then here's a shot of the other side doing the same thing. A good way to clean up the paint after you're done is the Duplicolor black touch-up pen. You can get those at Pep Boys or any auto parts store. Those help touch up the cuts after you're all done. Once you've cut it, it'll look like you see here in the video. And as you can see, you can leave the frame and engine all together and assembled. The next shot here is the brake line. Now I'm showing it off the bike, but you can leave it on the bike, just detach it from the frame. You're going to cut it here and on the line also shown up front. Basically, this is going to be to allow you to mount the hardtail. On the right, you see one that's not cut, and on the left, you see one that's cut. And now here it is on the bike, attached with the original hardware. The next shot you're going to see is you're going to have to grind with your flapper disc or your grinding disc these two Fender mounts. You're just going to grind them down a little bit so that you can run a straight edge across the back of the frame. Here's the grinder disc and showing grinding those down. You're going to want to shave a little bit off until you can run a straight edge across the frame rails, and they are at the same height as shown in this image here. Alright, this next image we're going to cut the motor mounts, the upper motor mounts. You're going to take off the top part of the motor mount and shave the frame rail here. You're going to need to shave this down so the tunnel of the gas tank can clear, as well as cut off the front tank mounts. The original tank mounts need to come off, and as you can see on here, I've touched it up with the paint pen. And also you're going to cut those motor mounts as shown here. This will allow the tank to fit over the frame rail. And the same thing on the other side. Cut the original motor mount down. Now you want to take those off the bike before you cut them. And same here, shave that down and shave this motor mount down so that you can fit the tank over the frame rail as shown in this next image here. Once the tank can fit down over the frame rail, you've successfully done that job. Next, you're going to take the nylon spacers that we've included with the kit. These are 1/2-inch spacers. They're going to sit on the cross member for the seat mount assembly. Now these sit in place. You go ahead and put them over the threaded holes in the cross member on the frame rails. And then you're going to take your tank mount assembly and your hinge, which will be off the bike at this point, and you're going to take your M6 by 20 millimeter hex head. Now they won't have lock washers as shown here. It's better if they don't for clearance on the seat hinge. You're going to take the M6 by 20 hex head bolts and finger tight into position there so that the tank mount is along the backbone. And here you can see the hex heads are in position. Next, you're going to be drilling the frame rail for these 5 holes. Now you're going to do the one hole first, the very back hole with an 1/8-inch drill bit. Just drill the one hole first, as shown in this image here. Once the tank mount is aligned perfectly, go ahead and drill it. And you're going to want to get a rivet gun with an 1/8-inch bit, and you can pick these up at Home Depot or any auto parts store. And you're going to rivet with one of the 5 rivets included. You're going to go ahead and rivet the first hole. So drill that first hole and rivet it so that it's tight in position. Once it's tight in position, you can go ahead and drill the other 4 holes. The reason we do one before is so that all the holes line up so that you can rivet them successfully. So here I'm drilling and riveting the remaining 4 holes. So once you've got all 4 of those remaining rivets in place, it'll look like this. So you have all 5 rivets in place and down the backbone, holding the seat mount, tank mount in position. Now you can go ahead and tighten down those hex head bolts like before. And you'll see the hinge is not on at this point, but now the hinge is on. So go ahead and put the hinge on with the Allen heads. Notice the 2 washers, one goes on the inside and one goes on the outside of each left and right. Here's a shot of a stock hinge before assembly, just showing for reference where the washers go. All right, next the coil is going to get mounted to this new position on the right-hand side. Notice the M6 by 25 Allen head cap screws that go through. Now you're going to have to drill the coil out carefully with a 1/4-inch drill bit in order for those cap screws to go through. Once you've drilled the coil out, those cap screws can go through. Now the coil won't sit flush against these mounts, but the rear mount will sit flush, but the front will have a little bit of gap. All right, now we're moving on to the thumb lever decompression. Now this is to replace the stock solenoid. The thumb lever goes in the original position, as shown here, and notice when you stick it on, it is slotted. It'll fit only in one position, and the spring will go above the protruding part. Now when you mount the decompression, the new thumb mount, you're going to want to jump these 2 wires together on your hand controls. Now this is a safety switch for to make sure that your clutch is pushed in, but we disconnect that. Just make sure, be very careful when you start your bike after you do this, that you have the bike in neutral at all times. And I've removed the switch as well, just for safety's sake, or just for a cleaner look. Now here we have a vacuum cap that you're going to want to put on the carburetor at this position. This is because we don't use a vacuum petcock anymore. So vacuum cap that as included in the kit, and go ahead and attach your air filter as well. Here, the next position, we're going to mount the tank on the rear frame. So the rear of the tank is going to mount with Allen head bolts. In the rear of the tank, you're going to mount with M6 by 16 Allen head bolts and oversized washers, as shown in this next image. And this will make sure the tank is lined up left to right when you do so. So here's the M6 by 16s. And then the front, you're going to drill the front out. Here's the position of the rear mounted. Make sure it's level left to right and front to back, and everything sits in nice position. Now when the front is mounted, you're going to see we're going to drill through the gusset on the front. Here the tank is showing nice and level left to right. So when your tank is nice and level, go ahead and mark your front holes. And I recommend marking them on each side before you drill. Now here's the other side. You can use a 5/16 or an 8mm drill bit to do this. And you're going to take your M8 by 55 Allen head cap screw. Yours will be zinc plated, and your acorn nut included with the kit. And the M8 by 55 is going to go through the frame rails as shown here and tightened up on the other side. Just make sure your tank is nice and level before you do that. Make sure you drill it from each side, not just one side all the way through. Okay, next here we have the large hardtail bolt that's going to go in position to mount the hardtail. Now the hardtail might be a little tricky. It's a little tight to fit, but we want to make sure it fits nice. So I recommend putting a screwdriver in the right-hand side to hold it in position while you stretch the left-hand side over the frame rails. If the hardtail is too tight, you can file the sides of the frame as shown here. Once it's over the frame rails and in position, carefully slide the long motor mount hardtail bolt through the assembly and just partially thread it into the other side. Don't tighten it down at this point. You may want to tighten that down when we're all done. And then next you're going to see some special bolts. These are the header point bolts. They're M8 by 25. These are to mount the rear of the hardtail section in position. These are hex head, not the Allen heads that are shown, but the hex head bolts. These are header point bolts. The tip is special so that you can hold it in position. See, sometimes during the welding process, those holes won't exactly match up to the Suzuki mounting position. Suzuki's frames varied a little bit, and welding these hardtails makes a little bit of variation. So that header tip helps hold the frame in position to get the threads lined up. Just be very careful they're going in straight, that you don't cross thread them. And like I said, they're going to be hex head, not Allen head, included with the kit. All right, next we're going to mount the brake line. The brake line goes in position here. You go ahead and unbolt the front, move the dust boot back, slide it through the brake line, tighten the hex head bolt, and then slip the dust cover back on. This holds the brake line in position on the hardtail. All right, for the seat springs, we're going to mount the lower portion of the seat springs to the frame at this point. The lower seat springs go into position with an M8x25 hex head and some washers. So you can mount those on the bottom of the mount of the hardtail or the top. The top we recommend for heavier riders, maybe over 180. If you're a lighter or you like the position of the lower seat mount, you can mount them to the bottom. I use the bottom. I'm about 175 and for that lower seat look. But here's them mounted with the M8x25 with hex heads and washers to the underside of the mounts. Next, you're going to drill this tab on the frame with an M6 or 1/4-inch drill bit. You're going to want to drill out the threads on that nut, as shown here, just showing you for reference that we've drilled that out with a 1/4-inch drill bit. And here you're going to drill this tab for the belt guard to 3/8. That's to allow the new bolt to hold in position. As you can see here, we've drilled it out to 3/8. Now the oil can goes on with the M6x40 Allen head bolts. These are going to hold the oil can, the false oil can, in position. Here I've shown the large washers and the M6x40 bolts with a gap in between. This is to allow the cap to slide on. Once you get in that position, you're allowed. It allows you to move the oil can left to right till it's centered between the frame rails. And I'm just going to set the little 3/8 Allen bolt in position. I'm not going to tighten that to the belt guard yet. We're going to do that later. That's just to hold the oil can in position while you tighten it down. Here I'm just showing holding it in place. Okay, this next step is going to show the starter solenoid. This is the battery cable that goes to ground. Now this we've shortened and included electrical eyelets to shorten this wire down. You may want to do it at the end when your battery is in position. It just allows to get rid of excess wiring. And the starter solenoid, we've flipped the terminals to the opposite side, so you can keep them on the same position but flip the wires so that they point in the opposite direction. This will allow you to run the wires the correct way. As you can see here, they're pointing to the left instead of the right. And we've added the M6x10 millimeter Allen head bolt with a lock nut underneath to the tab that we include. This is to mount the starter solenoid across the frame rails. As shown here in this picture, we're going to now put it on the frame rails across the motor mounts and secure it into position with the M6x10 Allen head bolts. There you can see it's in place. And here I've shortened the wire from the starter solenoid to the starter with one of the included eyelets, crimped those on with pliers, and I solder them for extra strength. Rectifier goes inside the oil can with the an M8 bolt right there. That's an M8x16 bolt, or M8x16 bolt. And all the wiring and CDI box and all the electrical can now get run into the oil can top and bottom holes. You're going to feed all those wires down inside the oil can, as you can see here, through the top hole and the bottom hole till everything's mounted inside. Connect all the connectors back up, and it's a super easy install. Now they're pushed inside the can. It's a really easy method to mount all the wiring and such. And as you can see out the back, bottom hole, I have the two battery terminals, the positive and the negative. And on the positive terminal, we recommend bending that flat, as you can see here, in order for an easy mount to the battery. The next one I've shown pulled out of the oil can is the taillight. Next step is soldering the taillight wires together. The red wire on the brake light goes to the white wire with the black stripe on the bike. The black and white wire on the brake light goes to the black and white wire on the bike. And the black wire on the brake light goes to the brown wire on the bike. Okay, next we got the M6 threaded rods. Now these are going to go through the battery tray with the M6 nuts. You're going to need 10 M6 nuts, 2 lock nuts, and 4 washers. Slide those threaded rods through the battery tray. Put 2 of the nuts on, as shown here. And then put the rods all the way through and tighten those nuts down accordingly. And on the outside, mount 2 more nuts. Now make sure you use Loctite on all of these nuts. This bike vibrates a lot. You're going to want to make sure they don't come loose. Then slide 2 more M6 and then the M6 oversized washers onto the threads. And this is going to be for your lower fender mount, as shown in position here from the rear. Now you can notice that these are 4 inches apart. That's where you're going to drill your fenders. You're going to drill your fenders at 4 inches apart. Now here, if you like the positioning of the bobber on the cover of the build video, we recommend cutting off about 12 inches. And so you can see here the optional bob fender and the smooth fender. I'm showing in the video the bob fender and the smooth fender. Here we're cutting off 12 inches, but you may want to position the fender yourself and cut off a little more or a little less. Here we show the cut mark and the 2 drill points equally centered at 4 inches apart. So you take your take your ruler and mark up about 3/4 of an inch up from the cut and 4 inches apart, centered, as shown here in these images. So that's about 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of the fender, and then 4 inches apart. You're going to drill those with a 1/4 inch drill bit, as shown here. And once you've drilled those, stay tuned for the next video, and we're going to show you how to mount the fenders.